Greetings, Summoners. Cosmic here, and welcome back to another Battle Spirits Saga video. And today we're going to be talking about the Loki combo deck that I played in our most recent versus video. And a lot of people asked me for the list, and it's very much a work in progress, but hey, let's talk about it, right? So with set 2, we did see the start, and I want to be very clear on this, the start of a new archetype, because as we've been testing this, and I'm sure many others have as well, you have this token idea in white, and with the cards we're going to be talking about today, you also have the token side in green with like Alvar Plains and the Queen and all the cool ant stuff and like Carry Core. It's far more fleshed out in green, and a lot of people, rightfully so, was like, hey, let's just combine them, right? Is there a green-white token deck? And ultimately, after spending more time with at least the mono white version and then the very little bit of the green version I did play, I think there is some overlap. You can see we're playing the Ant Strike back here because we just need another token generator. But I think these decks are ultimately going to go in two very different directions. Again, as we saw with set 1 to set 2, we saw purple decks get expanded into more different directions. We have core control, and now we have shadows as two very different archetypes popping up in the meta. And I think that's what we're going to see here as well for a token strategy out of white and green, kind of diverging into their own paths with set 3. Now, again, I think it is, early enough that if you want to blend them together, feel free to do so. But I've been having a lot of fun with this, and it does have that same drawback as Nemesis, where yes, you want to destroy your own cards for some kind of value, but in purple with Nemesis, right, you have Lamrack and you have Rotting Swamp and you have other ways that naturally give you just better card advantage, which is a very purple thing, to be fair, where white generally has those like higher end top heavy decks or cards in the deck that really just want to be strong on their own, so you don't have a lot of draw power. Well, spoiler, we still have Netherworld Depths, so we are going to be playing the full 4 of it because you just need the draw power. But as I was playing this out, I was quite surprised. Like, the Gunsmith Mime and Donor combo, while them by themselves as a power level perspective isn't all that exciting because the tokens you only get are 3k. Burning Force is still going to hurt you quite a bit for clearing up your board, but when you're able to cycle through multiple of those draws, you can kind of get a good draw engine going where then you eventually find things like the elephant and then find your combo pieces overall. So I think this is not going to be like a tier 1, oh my god, must play it type of deck anytime soon, but it is the start of a new archetype. So I really want to at least put a video together, talk through some of the choices, talk about some of the combos, and hopefully get some other people out there brewing, because yes, it does have Axe Spider. I know that's another key topic point right now, but because you are playing a mecha deck and because you want to play Infinity Mothership for the extra core ramping as well as getting your cores back for defensive plays, Axe Spider is just a very natural fit. There's not much you can do about that, but it is going to be like, there is something mecha going forward. And then, of course, we're playing Elephant on the top end because it's just, one of the best top end cards in white for what you can be doing. So overall, it's been a ton of fun, but let's get into the cards themselves. So up first, we have Trickster Machine God Loki. This is our new X-Rare from set 2. When destroyed by an opponent, so again, that's not a level restriction, that's just if they strip out the cores, you get a token. So in the early versions of this list, yes, while it is expensive with only having a 2 reduction for a total cost of 6, I found myself like kind of wanting the first one to die because you just need more tokens. So I actually did increase this to 4. And then the other thing, if you go back to the versus videos, an 8k attacking is just kind of good, and so I didn't have time to test it for this video itself, but I almost want to put Volcanic Canyon in here as well so that we can bump up to a 9 or even 10k if we get it going, while also have the filtering for your combo. So probably should have spent, if I had time, to spend a little more time dealing with like a red variant, so you could have like Star Blast Draw is very good in this format as well, and then also have that cycling and power threshold. But turns out this is just a good card. So what is the combo, right? What is the OTK, if you're lucky enough to set it up? It's the level 3 effect, which, 4 for 8 is not bad for where you want to be, all things considered, but when you or your opponent loses life, right? So keep in mind, this is on either turn. Select one of your mecha, spirits, or nexuses. You may return it to your hand to refresh this spirit. So what this allows us to do is on defense be a multi-blocker, which for 8k can be quite good, right? All things considered. And we can bounce some of our own enablers like Gunsmith Mine to create extra tokens, and then hopefully block out another spirit. On attacking, right, that 8k is now coming through and saying, okay, sir, you lost a life. Let me bounce this token if I have nothing else on the board, right? Because they are still mecha tokens. Get rid of my token. It's going to refresh itself. Or again, my enablers or anything else on my board that can bounce. or an extra Nexus. It does happen. And you're like, okay, this is now going to be a double attacker. And then, of course, if you've been playing since set 1, the real value or the real cheeky thing that you can do with Dual Gun Mechalord Derm Dyna, we can make it unblockable using his level 1, technically 1, 2, and 3 when the Spirit attacks raise base form. So essentially what you want to do is have both these cards on the board, swing with Derm Dyna, say I'm making these two guys unblockable because you probably will only have, 2 Nexuses in play. Derm Dyna does need to finish his attack, but at that point, if your opponent doesn't immediately have an Absolute Ice Shield, a Dream Bomb, a Core Theft, yeah, there's a number of answers here, obviously, but they are quite limited because at 8k, you can't Volcanic Break it, right? Loki is going to say, okay, cool, you're at 5 life. I'm threatening dealing 5 damage. I will bounce my entire board if I have to, because if you don't have a Dream Bomb, the game is ending this turn. So I do like the restriction, and what I really like about this in particular is that as the game goes on, and as we know from Japanese Battle Spirits, we will most likely get some type of mecha that is then also a searcher. So this is very common in other Bandai games where you'll play, let's say, some 3-drop, right? When summoned, reveal a top 3 cards, pick a mecha from them, add 1 to your hand sort of thing, right? Some kind of on-reveal shenanigans like that. With that, we could then say, okay, well, Mr. Loki, go ahead and bounce my searcher so that the next time I can just replay it and get more value, right? That's eventually where Battle Spirits is going to go, or I should say Battle Spirits Saga, because we've already seen this in Battle Spirits, and we know that this is a very common design flow that Bandai follows because it's in all of their card games. So I really do like the idea of, while this isn't as fully fleshed out as an archetype in set 2 as I might like it to be, I think, in my first review, I rated Loki kind of low, and I was like, oh, haha, the combo is cute sort of thing, to, oh, this is actually good, and surprisingly, just hitting for 8k can be really nice. So you'll notice between this version and the older one that I posted, I think it was a Twitter or the Discord group, one of the two, I posted a list without Valkyrie Miss, and I think this is building a case for Valkyrie Miss can be really, really good, because now it's controlling the battlefield where you say, okay, I'm going to bounce your 7 or less that's going to block Loki and force you to say, hey, I'm losing this guy, or they're just going to combo off and Loki is going to attack multiple times. So it's a good way to control the board itself and how Loki wants to be attacking. So sequencing is very, very important in this deck. Again, ultimately, some of your other threats are not as sticky as we might like, and that's where I think when the End Strike Back come into play, because it's just any token you do want on your board ultimately for the draw effects. But I'm really curious to see where this evolves, but the 2 cards, again, maybe not as lining as much as we'd like from a consistency standpoint, but just having them both in the deck as our top end, I think gives us a good starting point for where we might want to see this develop in future sets. Moving on from there, we have our 2 new additions, or really like, hey, what are the enablers, right? For this archetype is Gunsmith Mime and Donar. So we have a builder and we have a spender, just to use the very generic card game and otherwise terms that are used even in like RPGs, right? Builders and spenders. Gunsmith Mime, very easy to get this effect. Yes, it does cost 4, which can be kind of a drag sometimes, and yes, both copies do just die to a Burning Force, which can feel pretty bad, but it does give you 2 blockers on the board. It's really nice to have like a 2 and a 3k body, especially if your opponent's on a more aggressive plan. It can slow them down a little bit. And then as we're building up these tokens, we are then feeding them into Thunder God Mech Donar. I just love that name, by the way. So it is a 5 cost, but it does have armor red and yellow. So I found out this is quite nice, right? So at level 2, which is what you're going to keep this at anyways because of its effect on the when attacker blocks, but armor red cannot be Volcanic Breaked. Great. Armor yellow, you can't Angelic Pressure it. So if you're going against the yellow deck, now you suddenly have like an okay attacker and blocker sort of thing. So I really like how this lines up and separates itself from the other type of strategies we've seen in the white deck. So it's really, again, it's one of those things that I might not have been as excited about when I was testing it. And yes, it is still overall, I think this archetype is lower power compared to like the big 3 in the format that we talk about a lot. But it's fun, and that's kind of all I'm looking for right now, right? Like, I love getting to test like this, and Blade Beast, I think, are, I was going to say on the same power level. I think Blade Beast is still slightly higher, but it's still on the, it's not just there yet, but it's really fun, and I really can't wait to see if someone takes time to refine this a bit more, because I found myself enjoying this quite a bit. But with Donar, with his level 2 at 3, 4, 5,000, when the spirit attacks or blocks, select one of your token spirits. So this is like everything up to this point has cared about Mecha, to be fair. This is the one that just says select one of your token spirits. You may place all the cores from it onto this spirit to draw 2 cards. So you do, of course, then have to sacrifice the token. You draw 2 cards. And I was quite surprised, and again, in a limited number of games, like this actually drew me quite a bit of cards. And again, white really does suffer from not having a dedicated draw engine where you are splashing Netherworld Depths, where you are playing Star Blessed Draw, right? Or Volcanic Canyon, so you can get that filter. And then, of course, every white deck under the sun is playing 4 Elephants right now because the draw 3 and ramp 3 is just very good. So I think this is hopefully a card or an archetype that we see more of in the future, where it's more of this like battle mecha field instead of like all in white control at the top end, right? So again, these two I think are going to be the archetype staples going forward in terms of how we see this evolve over time. But it really does feel like it needs just one more token generator, and I kind of wish it wasn't the Ants Strike Back, because again, the burst condition is when your opponent destroys one of your cards, so you can't like sacrifice your ant, then get, or sacrifice your token, right? Then trigger your burst and get more tokens. It has to be from your spirit, your opponent's destroying your spirit. So that is one of those things where like, okay, the sequencing can kind of feel pretty clunky at times, to be fully transparent. But when you get this online, when you're playing against these like more slower mid-range matches and you have time to like build into your combo, frankly, this is what you want anyways, right? It allows you to dig deeper into those pieces. And at least at 5K, if you have other effects that can boost it, it is becoming a very reasonable attacker or blocker as well. Moving on from there into some select spells to cover really quick outside the usual suspects. So Infinity Shield. Truly, this can be Infinity Shield or Suppression. The entire thought process behind this is ultimately that we are going to be spending our soul core to make Durham Dyna unblockable, so that in the instances where we don't have Mothership on board to then use it for suppression or something, we want to make sure we have a card that can at least give us an extra turn with Axe Spider being able to block out. Again, yes, that is going to be one of those, consideration points where, we have to stall out the game a little bit because this deck does require so much time to set up and find the key pieces, that yes, Axe Spider and some type of Infinity Shield and or Suppression is still going to be the best thing. Now, again, because we have Mothership and because we know it is such a key part of the deck, most likely we are going to find it. Just draw better, right? As the joke goes. But I've been liking Infinity Shield just for like the extra insurance of not having to have the Soul Core in the times where it gets awkward in sequencing. But ultimately, use whichever one you feel is right, but some copy of them for sure to help you build into your later game plan. And then the Ant Strike Back, I've talked about this one a little bit already, but it's quite literally just for more tokens. If there was any other token generator, I would take this out immediately. I do think it's cute that it's something you can play for free, and it's just whenever your opponent destroys a spirit. So it's like, hey, I block in battle, and now I have 2 more tokens you weren't counting for on my next turn. So there's cool little things you can do with it in terms of like getting that surprise draw your opponent might not be expecting. Also, again, thinking about like the aggro matchups, it can help stabilize you, where if they just go super wide and you just have smaller things on the board, you sacrifice one and you go, all right, well, I got 2 more guys. And then hopefully if they didn't overextend, right, they were trying to swing out and then kill you on the next turn. Now suddenly you have 2 more blockers where they were trying to whittle down your board. So yes, they do come into play exhausted, but it can throw off the blocker math that your opponent was banking on for the next turn. And that hasn't come up as much as I would like, but it's still a consideration that it's both a token enabler, which again, this deck needs sorely, and also just something that you can still chump block with just to buy yourself a little bit more time, which again, this is something that this deck needs quite badly. And then, of course, at our other card for the top end is the Mecha Beast Fortress Numengard. This has been a staple for, slower white decks since the launch event. It's still going to be a staple for mostly, green ramp decks too are going to start using this as well. It's just very good. Yes, it's going to get dream bombed, or if your opponent bounces it in some way, it's going to feel really, really bad. But too often, just a 10K refresher, especially because we have the Nexus cards that we want to ramp into this quicker, right? We have the city that counts as triple reductions for this. There are other ways to accelerate into this and play more of a Machine Beast control deck if you wanted to, and then play like Aegis in this list as well. And that's like how you can shift the deck from a Mecha Beast or a Mecha list to a Machine Beast, but that is kind of getting muddy and then you change quite a bit. But I think by itself, Mecha Beast Fortress Nomengard is good enough on the top end that you want to include it anyways. because you struggle so much with draw. And this just does so much for you, as well as giving us some additional cores, which this deck can be kind of core hungry depending on how you line up your resources and how many tokens you have on the field at a time. So definitely something to look out for. And again, change this list however you may. Do not take out 4 elephants. That's the only thing I would say. Make sure you keep 4 of this guy in there because you just so desperately need the draw and the ramp. And then getting into like our last 2 flex spots, which truth be told, I had no idea what I was going to include here. So for Heavy Tank Curiosity, it's really just to help you against the curse style of decks, right? So purple curse in general, because during either attack step, your Mecha Spirits can now be protected from curse, right? So this is a card that can come down early and just say, okay, well, my entire deck is now protected, which remember, 3K Mecha token protection from curse is not bad, all things considered, and especially when a lot of the white decks, or excuse me, the yellow decks going into the white want to be, lower in multi-attacker. Sometimes just having that lower token spam can help out quite a bit. And then, of course, there's other things that will destroy in combat, but it's mostly going to be for the destruction effects. Now, again, it does have to be during the attack step, and that's where this can get a little bit awkward. Yes, it is a 4K for 2. Unfortunately, if your opponent just goes, hey, main phase Burning Force, as you saw in the versus video, doesn't feel great, but, we can't do much about that. Obviously, Curiosity couldn't be the catch-all for absolutely everything under the sun, but, it's pretty good at what it wants to be doing. And again, it's a mecha. Everything about our deck cares about mecha, and it's also cheap enough that we can play it again the turn after we bounce it from Loki. So something that we can keep cycling turn after turn is also very welcome. And then the one that I've been testing out a total of like 2 games with so far, but it was, I kind of forgot it's just fine to have, is Valkyrie Mist. Sometimes you just want to remove that problematic spirit on your opponent's side so that your Loki can get in some chip damage. That's one of the more difficult parts with this deck is trying to sequencing your attacks, right? You really can't ever afford to actually OTK your opponent from 5 to 0 per se. You really do want to try getting a couple chip damages where every Loki is now like, hey, this is a double attacker threatening lethal. You have to have an answer for it, right? So definitely keep that in mind as well, that those couple early turns of chip damage are very, very important. And Valkyrie Mist, because it can bounce something and attack, can do exactly that. So I think after I change up the list a little bit more, yes, it's not a mecha, so that part does feel a little bit bad, but I really do like Valkyrie Mist in this list. And it's really more of that like mid-range style of white deck that we saw way back in the early launch or the early set 1 meta right after the launch event. So I'm curious to see, if this list can be refined and play some of that same style that it did back then and give us another not just control, right, style of decks, although this does have controlling elements, to be very clear. And with that, we have our Loki OTK, Loki combo, Mecha combo, whatever name you want to give this deck. But it's an archetype that I love. Again, this goes back to me just really enjoying Battle Spirits Saga and watching some of these archetypes develop, because as we now saw with Shadows in set 1, right, getting Lamorak was huge, getting Impaler Forest was huge. Technically, getting Palomides was really huge for the archetype as well. Palomides is not making an appearance yet, but maybe someday soon, right? But we get to see these evolve as these sets kind of continue to develop. So I'm really, really curious on where this lands for set 3, right? We know that this is going to see more support. At a minimum, we're going to get some type of mecha that we most likely are going to get more bounce value from Loki, right? So this is one that I'm going to just keep on my radar, kind of keep in my back pocket and kind of see where it develops. Because, not everybody wants to play the all-in aggro deck or the all-in control deck. This is a nice middle ground. And it does some fun stuff, I think, that, we haven't really seen yet in Battle Spirits, but we'll continue to see in future sets. So with that, again, thank you so much for tuning into the deck list for this. Again, we use it in our versus video, so make sure to go check that out. And of course, we will have more content on the channel very, very soon. So with that, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.